All right, so this lecture, as you saw on the title of the link, is about Climax and, of course, about Hamlet. Climax becomes a term that is challenging for us, in part because it not only has different meanings in conversation outside the classroom as opposed to in the academic environment, but within the academic environment and even more specifically within the literature course. Okay? Climax means one of two things. The moment of greatest emotional intensity or investment, or the turning point. Okay? The first definition is the one that is closest to the conversational definition and is the one that is more common in contemporary conversation, even about literature. The climax, in this sense, is the moment at the end of the movie where you have the final moment of conflict and all the drama. If you think about the end of Avatar, the climax, according to definition 1, would be the final battle between Sam Worthington, who is the protagonist, and the aliens on one hand, and the human miners, the former military guys that are security for the miners on the other hand. In Avengers, the climax, according to definition 1, is the battle for New York in the first film. In the second film, it's the battle for Sokovia when the city gets attacked and lifted up into the air by Ultron, etc. Okay? The second meaning of climax has to do with the structure of a story, and most of us have encountered the term climax first as part of the plot, as a point on the plot hill. And this turning point meaning, where it comes in that case, in the case of structure. So, when we talk about the structure of a narrative, and plays are narrative constructs, okay? Drama is a narrative genre. Short stories and novels are narrative genres. You can have narrative poetry, although poetry is not an inherently narrative structure, okay? And they all borrow from the plot hill, which we were introduced to a long time ago in Taking Their Shape. Now, most of you will have seen the plot hill drawn like this. This is how I encountered it. And you could fill it in. We have the exposition, which includes introducing the setting and introducing the characters, setting up the world of the story. We have the inciting incident. And the inciting incident is the moment at which the conflict is introduced. We learn what the story is really going to be about. Yes, it's about the characters, but there is almost always a conflict that there has to be a conflict for there to be a story for the characters to engage in. And the story is not just about the characters or just about the conflict. It's about the character in that conflict and what the conflict does to them. This long slope, we'll remember, is called the rising action. Okay? And the rising action represents a series of obstacles that the hero or protagonist encounters as she moves through the conflict, trying to resolve it. In a structural sense, the climax occurs here. There is another word in literature which describes this point in the narrative structure and only refers to this point in the narrative structure, okay, and that is the crisis. We then have the falling action, and the resolution, or in French, and I like the term better, the denouement. Okay, if I've misspelled that, I don't speak French. I just fake the accent decently, so you'll have to forgive me. The denouement, or untying of the knots. Now, we know Aristotle talked about plot and the three unities of time and place and subject, and that was a big deal to him. And he gives us our first definition of plot, which people have debated ever since. And it basically functioned like this. But they compared it to the tying of a knot and then the untying of a knot. And the rising action represented the tying of the knot. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and then you have the crisis or turning point at which the knot has gotten to its tightest and we begin untying it. Okay, and the falling action and the resolution or denouement represent the untying of that knot, or the sorting out of the situation that the plot has built to at the crisis. And we come from the moment of crisis, the turning point, will it be good, will it be bad? And we untie the knot and figure out how things are going to end up. Now, you can see how when we use the first definition of crisis, and I gave you examples from film, you can see how if we were to draw those plots, it might be a lot more like this, okay? Where the rising action is much longer. And as we've moved into modern times, dramatic structure has pushed the climax in the second definition, the turning point. It has pushed the crisis closer and closer to the denouement, okay? And many times, this structure only applies in a very general sense to modern narrative stories. We have, especially in the 20th century, really emphasized, we being Western society, have really emphasized breaking formatic structures. We have free verse, we have novels that try to avoid having a plot and just be about a character. The result normally is what the general audience would call a very simple or boring plot. You can't get away from plot altogether, excuse me, and still have a narrative, but we fought form. We fought form willingly and very, very dramatically. Now, if we were to put Hamlet on here and insist on the events of the play, okay, we have the exposition with the ghost's first visit, and the scene in the dining room with Hamlet and his uncle and his aunt and his uncle and his mom, aunt, and the courtiers, which sets up the situation for us. Denmark is practically at war. They're preparing for war. They're scared of Norway. They've been in conflict with Norway for a long time. Matter of fact, Hamlet Sr. beat the King of Norway in a personal duel, and etc. Hamlet meets the ghost. Okay, so the ghost's second appearance in the play when we learn about the murder. This is our inciting incident. Okay, Hamlet is introduced to the conflict in full. Hamlet, your uncle murdered me, and then he stole the throne from you, and he stole my wife. You need to get revenge for me. Okay? We then have the rising action in which Hamlet struggles with all kinds of things. Now, Hamlet's struggle is largely internal. Am I going to kill this guy or not? And if I am going to do it, how can I do it? He's the king. There are lots of conflicts here, okay? And we see the action slowly build. Now, We can say for sure that the resolution comes in Act 5 with the duel with Laertes in which everybody dies, because it's a Shakespearean tragedy. And in Shakespearean tragedy, at the end, everybody dies. That's how it works. In which everybody dies. All the principal characters that were part of the plot. Okay? Hamlet dies, Gertrude dies, Claudius dies, Laertes dies, at least one other person in most versions of the play walks onto the screen and dies. We find out that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have been killed. They also die. So, as a matter of fact, we'll see later in the class a joke made about Hamlet in which they stage what appears to be Act 5 of Hamlet with a whole bunch of people dying. And somebody asks, hey, what play is that? And they say, oh, it's The Slaughterhouse. So, yeah, everybody dies. All right, but the question remains. Here is our moment of greatest emotional intensity. This is the moment where everything is resolved and the deaths happen and we see the tragedy carried out on Hamlet. Here he's tried so hard. He's gotten control of himself. He's getting ready to take on his uncle, and events move in such a way that instead bring down him, bring down the king, bring down the queen, bring down Laertes, bring down the kingdom. And now Fortinbras of Norway has Hamlet's vote of support to be king of Denmark. Okay, so, but if that's not the climax, in this modern sense, according to definition 1, this is definitely the climax. And in conversation, we would talk about this as the climax. However, in dramatic structure, we can tell, just by the view of the plot hill, that the climax has to have happened earlier. Okay, this is where the idea of crisis or climax as turning point of the plot occurs. Okay? And so we have to separate the idea of climax as the most action-filled, the most intense part of a story, and climax as turning point or crisis in the dramatic or narrative structure. Now, the person that first drew out a hill as a representative of plot drew it very differently, and I think it will help us to better understand what's happening. He drew a perfect, well, not perfect, Mr. Dahlberg or any of you guys that are in his class or Ms. Hunts could measure it and tell me it's not perfect, but he drew a triangle, okay, with the climax or crisis at the top, exposition is part of the first half, followed by complication. And he considered all of this the rising action because even the exposition is leading up to the crisis. Then you have the falling action over here, which occurs as a result of the climax or crisis. And it is broken into a specific moment of reversal and ends with catastrophe. Now, this structure far better describes what Shakespeare is doing in Hamlet as far as narrative structure than our modern plot hill does. It puts the crisis or climax in the center of the story where it belongs and presents the plot as is the plot structure as is reflected in Hamlet. Okay? He doesn't spend a lot of time setting it up or building exposition. We are into the rising action almost immediately. And even the part that is technically exposition, that comes before the second appearance of the ghost, the inciting incident, is absolutely already introducing conflicts. Okay, we're already finding out, okay, the king just died, here's Hamlet, he's old enough to be king, but his uncle is king, and he's married his mom, close enough that in Hamlet's words, the hot foods from the funeral were served cold as refreshments at the wedding. Really close together. Okay, so if then we keep our exposition the same and the series of complications, and we have the reversal, and then we keep the catastrophe the same. Here's Act 5 again, right? We have the ghost's appearances. We meet the characters and we have the ghost's appearances. Here's Act 5 with the final duel where everybody's dying. Okay. Then in the middle, and the 5-act structure was literally meant to reflect this, so somewhere in Act 3 is our crisis or turning point, our climax. So in a literary sense, the climax or crisis is the point at which an event happens in the play or doesn't happen, okay? Somebody may fail to act, but a moment comes in the play that determines whether the ending is going to be good or bad for the character, okay? And everything that happens in the play after that can be drawn back to that point. It is the crisis or the reversal. It's a reversal in the sense that we move from getting more complicated, we reverse directions, and we start heading down in a tragedy into the catastrophe. And the gentleman, his name was Freytag, German names. Freytag constructed his pyramid so that the catastrophe happened at the end. And you can tell by his use of catastrophe that his primary example of this structure, exposition, complication, climax, reversal, catastrophe, was the 5-act structures Shakespeare used for dramatic tragedy. Okay? So somewhere in Act 3 of Hamlet, and Hamlet does fit the 5-act structure very well. Not all Elizabethan plays do. Any general structure like this is a most but not all at best. And this one is maybe many but not all instead of most but not all. But Hamlet fits it very well. Act 1 is our exposition. Act 2, the conflict really picks up. Act 3, we have the climax. Act 4 is the beginning of the falling action. We know it's going to go badly for Hamlet after the climax. This is not going to work out. There's all kinds of foreshadowing that lets us know that this is going to be bad. And then the 4th act sets up the duel that is coming in the 5th act, prevents Hamlet from acting against the king until the king is ready to receive him. And Hamlet and everybody else end up dead. Okay? So there is a key moment in Hamlet, in the 3rd act, at which we move from the rising action to the falling action. And it's a moment where a decision is made, or where Hamlet acts or fails to act, or somebody else does, in which the fate of the protagonist is sealed. Okay? I felt pretty certain coming into this lecture that I knew exactly where that was. I had it down. But in reading the material that I read to prepare this, I found a convincing argument for another moment in Act 3 that I think works really well. At least you could make an equal case for it. I'm partial to my own because who isn't? We like to be right. But this isn't something that is rock solid, set in stone. I could give you 2 good arguments right now. I won't, because that's what you will be doing tomorrow, or in class today if you're watching this Wednesday morning during the hour. So, to recap, Climax, in general terms, in conversational terms, in modern times, is defined as the moment of most intensity or the greatest emotional investment in a narrative. In traditional literature, particularly in classical literature like Aristotle, right up through the Renaissance, the climax or crisis was a part of the narrative structure, the turning point at which a decision was made or something happened or failed to happen that seals the protagonist's fate for good or bad. Normally for bad, as this was most often applied to tragedy. But there's an event that seals their fate. After this, you know things are going to go badly for them. Okay? So I want you to think about this in terms of Hamlet. What is it that happens in Act 3 where we find ourselves turning from setup to, oh man, now we know this isn't going to go well, and it's just a matter of waiting to see how the events specifically happen that lead to everyone's death at the end of the play.